The Laura Flanders Show. This is a place to go for stories of resilience, power shifting, and change rooted in love. This is Leah Penniman from Soulfire Farm.
The Laura Flanders Show is made possible by listeners just like you. You can become a sustaining member and help keep our programming independent, audacious, and ad-free. Go to patreon.com/The LF Show and become a member. I'm Laura, and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Everything worthwhile is done with other people, writes Mariame Kaba, today's guest. Kaba is an abolitionist, organizer, and educator, founder-director of Project NIA, which seeks to end the incarceration of children and young adults, and the author of the New York Times best-selling book, We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organizing and Transforming Justice. The collective, not the individual self, is at the heart of Kaba's vision for freedom. Abolition of the prison-industrial complex is essential, but, she says, freedom also takes getting to know your neighbors, thinking about how we can help each other, and building an entire society where harm is addressed, people's needs are met, and accountability doesn't require punishment. Here at the Laura Flanders Show, we too believe in the power of the collective, and so all season we've been expanding ours. I'm teaming up with brilliant colleagues who enrich what we do here. Today, for our Juneteenth conversation on abolition, I'm joined by my friend Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis from Middle Collegiate Church in Manhattan's East Village, a multiracial, multicultural, multi-everything congregation dedicated to collective liberation and love, period. Jacqui, welcome to the show. So glad to have you for this conversation. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth to you too, Laura. I'm so glad to be here with you, Freedom Fighter.
Let's bring ourselves to the conversation with Mariame Kaba. Mariame, welcome so much to the program. We really couldn't be happier to have you with us. And I guess I want to ask you and Jacqui to begin something about, where you think we are. This Juneteenth, we're celebrating, I think it is 155 years of so-called liberation, the end of legal slavery. But we still have a long way to go to the kind of freedom that you write about and that we all think about and work for. How do you think we're doing? Mariame, let's start with you. Where are we on that long path?
I think the best answer is I have no idea where we are. And I think, to me, I don't think anybody else really does either. And I think that's actually part of the work, which is always unfinished. I'm lucky because I grew up with parents and people, mentors and touchstones who always reminded me of how vast the world is and how small we are within that, and that our work is to figure out what is within our control to actually influence and to spend all our time doing that. And I think that's probably held me in really good stead, and it's probably why I've been trying to do liberation work for 35 years or more now.
You are the child of immigrants. You're the child of people who helped decolonize, to liberate their countries. Guinea, your father. Can you just trace that connection? Do you trace a connection from Guinea to abolition in the U.S.?
Oh, of course. My dad, I learned a lot from him, but I think one of the two most important things that I learned from him was deep, profound pragmatism. And then the second thing he really taught me was that you don't need everyone. In order to transform the world, you need a committed group of folks who you can work to it and build together. And those are important abolitionist ideas in the sense that the collective matters, but we don't need to worry about having every single person on board before we can take action, and that it is really, really important for us to remain grounded in ideas matter, but that's not what people are fighting for. People are fighting for material needs to be met and for ways to be able to survive in the world, and we can't ever forget those things.
What about you, Jacqui? What about you with this sense of where are we on the path?
There's an old Negro spiritual that says we're not what we ought to be, but we're not what we used to be. There is a sense of between the now and the not yet that I'm noticing. Our body, the human family, not only in America, not only in the United States, but around the globe, has had a crisis. It's an ongoing crisis. To Mariame's point, we're a little blip on the screen. The universe is huge. Maybe this is a crisis actually a millennia long. But in this moment, I feel like we're in the crisis that is still about chattel slavery, is about Reconstruction. It is about whiteness, white supremacy in a death throw, I think.
Coming back to you, Mariame, you talked about yourself as a tiny piece of a big struggle, a tiny, very hard-working piece of a big struggle. Does that explain why you choose to keep your own image out of the public eye? Why we're, for example, not seeing your face right now as we talk?
I think for me, I was taught how to organize by people who used to always say that it was always organizers in the back and leaders up front. As someone who was taught by those folks, I was always much more comfortable doing work in the background and felt like that was really where I ought to be. And it wasn't really until a few years ago, honestly, maybe a decade ago, because of social media, that I was pushed to be more public about how I worked and what kind of work I was doing. And I was asked to speak more about that work. People are feeling like they are owed, your very image, your very being. And I just don't agree with that. And I never have. And also, I'm not that important in the scheme of the larger goals that we're trying to push. And I hope people keep their eyes on that and keep thinking about focusing on the larger goals that we're trying to achieve.
Focus and clarity. And let's, in the spirit of that, I'm going to ask you just to define your terms. When you say abolition, what do you mean?
A person that just passed away recently, Thomas Mathieson, used to say that abolition is an alternative in the making. And I've always appreciated that conceptualization, even though I hate the word alternative. But I appreciated that kind of his conception of abolition as an unfinished work and as an unfinished process. So over time, I came to look at prison industrial complex abolition. I really think it's important for me to put that up front because that's the abolitionist work that I do and I'm part of, and kind of the political ground that laid underneath me. But that's a vision for me of a restructured society and the world. It's a world where you mentioned earlier, we have everything that we need and more. And
restorative versus transformative, or the other way around?
The vision of restorative justice that most people are familiar with is a Western-based system and framework that emerged in part through the work of a man named Howard Zehr here in the US in the 1960s and 70s, who saw the beginnings of the rise of what he saw as mass hyper and mass incarceration and thought this is not the way to go. And Howard and others in that tradition started to say, we need to know that when harm happens, when a crime, quote unquote, occurs, that crime is a rupture in relationship. And that what is needed then is to get people together, the person who was harmed, the person who caused harm, and the broader community, to think about three sets of questions. What happened? What is needed to repair this harm? And whose obligation is it to do that? But what I found limiting in that was the larger conversation around the conditions that needed to be transformed in order for that harm to not occur again. Mm-hmm. And that began, for me, a search with others about a concept that became known as community accountability and transformative justice. that was really about like, how do we do all the conversations we need to do amongst people while we're also doing the organizing work that actually transforms the conditions that gave rise to these things in the first place.
When you think about the work that you're called to do, the work that you're doing in your community, how does the media, how does education, how does particularly what's happening now in cinema, how do these stories help change the story?
I would say that I have a fraught relationship with kind of art and media in general. Laura mentioned June Jordan, a poet and writer and artist that I have just so much respect for, who was also an activist and much more than all those things. And I never got to meet June Jordan, but her words have been guides for me. On the one hand, there's that. So there's the edifying, useful, propelling kind of stuff around that. And then we have things like propaganda, which is this kind of the ways that the media has worked to not just uplift, but actually reinforce and entrench particular ideas that make it really hard for us to actually get to liberation.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guest is the amazing race, gender, and transformative justice organizer and educator Mariame Kaba. She's been active for years in the movement to stop violence against women and all gender-based violence, and she's co-founded multiple projects and organizations, including Project NIA, the grassroots group dedicated to ending youth incarceration that she directs now. She's also the author of We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organizing and Transforming Justice. And my guest co-host this time is Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis, Senior Minister at Middle Collegiate Church in New York City and co-founder of the Middle Project and the Revolutionary Love Conference that serves to train leaders to create a more just society. You can find a whole lot in our archives around restorative justice and abolition, and dig a little deeper for Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis's appearances in the past, and you'll be able to see her in her beautiful Middle Collegiate Church, which tragically in 2020 burned to the ground. That's at our website, lauraflanders.org. While you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter and you'll get information on all our streaming events and web exclusives, including, most recently, the full uncut conversation I had recently with Laverne Cox, Sam Fader, and Amy Scholder on their documentary Disclosure, about how trans people have been represented in Hollywood and how they're reclaiming their stories. All that and my regular commentaries. The latest is Take Pride in Desire. Next, we discuss the role media play, everything from the evening news to cop shows, in framing our early ideas about police and the police. But first, here's You Try Livin, Pressure by Black Guy, White Guy and 808 Beach, featuring Anelisa Lamola, and that's part of the new Red Hot and Free project produced by Bill Coleman of Peace Bisquit. Red Hot is a not-for-profit dedicated to fighting AIDS through pop culture since 1990.
Taxes, mortgage, rent, right around the world, no. Finance, equal violence. Oh, no. All I see is battlefield, pushing people to their knees. More to life than struggling. I need to dance. I need relief. Ain't no joke when you ain't got no money. When you ain't got no money, you try living when there's no milk and honey. No honey. Life ain't fun.
When was the first time, Jacqui, that you ever thought of police and policing?
Honestly, probably officer friendly, like in kindergarten, right?
Yeah. Yes, so officer friendly in kindergarten. You may, if you grew up in a house, maybe that, we have a gendered society. You may have grown up in a space, if you have brothers or cousins, or where they were playing cops and robbers. There was like a whole system in place before you could even be conscious of yourself as a human being, and whether you could actually be conscious of what police and policing was, that had already infused you by the time you were in kindergarten. And that's been sustained by media. That's been sustained by TV shows. That's been sustained by the toys young people get and that they play with. And it's so dangerous.
Let's go to a clip from a piece put out by Project NIA that looks at the origins of the relationship between police and communities of color.
People have a lot of opinions about policing, and our ideas about policing are shaped by our race, our genders, our class, and our parents. For example, most white people have very little interaction with police. In a recent study, 77% of white people had no contact with police in the previous year. Of those who did, at least half were traffic stops. And in many cases, white people initiated contact by calling the police. Since they have little unwanted contact, many white people's opinions about policing are not based on personal experience. Dominant culture, especially mass media, sells us the image of officer-friendly. But whose experience is that actually based on? The same study found that Black people experience excessive force at the hands of police at more than twice the rate of white people. Did we have a just and equitable police force and something went wrong? No. Policing in the South emerged from the slave patrols in the 1700s and 1800s that caught and returned runaway enslaved people. In the West, police departments were formed to keep Native people out of cities built by white settlers. And in the North, the first municipal police departments in the mid-1800s helped quash labor strikes and riots against the rich, and policed public spaces to conform to middle-class white morality around gender and sexuality and exclude poor, unhoused, or disabled people. Policing in the U.S. began as a system of economic, social, racial, patriarchal, and ableist control. And that is what it still is today. The truth is police don't do what most people think they do. Police spend more than half of their time responding to non-criminal calls and traffic issues, and only 1% to 3% of their time responding to violent crime calls. Police don't stop violence. They respond to violence that has already occurred, and they respond with their own threat of violence. And that response is not equitable. When people of color are involved, police often engage violently. Yet we spent an astronomical amount of money on the police. Over $100 billion a year. Let that sink in.
I want you to talk, though, about what we don't see in the media. Because a lot of us would say, well, this is just part of the background. This is what we have. How do we ever get out of this, particularly in the transformative way that you talk and write about? But you also write about examples where change is happening, where that transformation is at least beginning. And you talk about the work of Project NIA and the work of the Chicago Torture Victims Memorial Project that brought about some of the only reparations we've ever seen for police torture victims.
I got involved with that in 2010 as an advisory member of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. It was a great example of how you could marry art with social justice and organizing to actually allow us to do something that was very hard for most people, which was for years, decades, 30 years in Chicago, yeah. People had been fighting to expose John Burge, who was a police commander in Area 2 and Area 3 of Chicago, who with, quote, his midnight crew, which were all men, all white, had spent decades torturing Black people in Chicago and some brown folks as well. Literal torture, not like euphemistic torture, right? And by the time I moved to Chicago in 1995, Burge had been fired for 2 years. And community was still demanding, quote, what they saw as justice. And justice for them meant, incarceration, basically. It meant prosecute them, incarcerate them, punish them for what they had done. I was kind of not interested in the fight for prosecution. I'm an abolitionist. That's not where I sit. I didn't think it was going to be very successful anyway. I thought people were going to be left feeling very empty if a prosecution happened, and that's exactly what happened. The federal prosecution happened. He got, quote, 4 years for lying about torture. All the people who'd been harmed were still harmed, but now they had unsatisfactory, what they saw as end to a years-long, decades-long struggle. And so to force us to think differently, the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials organized these art charrettes around the whole entire city and asked people to envision what justice could really look like if we didn't just live in these very constrained models of supposedly getting accountability, right? Or punishment or whatever. And out of that came a reparations idea. We need to get material things, for people's lives to be improved. And we need an apology. We need an acknowledgement that this actually took place. In the current system, it's adversarial. It's in no one's interest to admit they did anything wrong, right? And so that was the model through which we were able to kind of use art and ideas to lift the ceiling off our imaginations, to push for something different.
I just interviewed a whole lot of people in Minneapolis who are holding two complicated thoughts in their minds at one and the same time. One, they're believers in transformation and abolition. Two, they are glad as heck that Derek Chauvin got convicted on all counts, and they were in the streets celebrating that night. Were we wrong to celebrate in the context of so much impunity?
This is a really difficult question on multiple levels. And I think for me, the main thing is I don't chastise anybody. Again, as I mentioned, if somebody causes grave harm, it's natural to feel a sense of relief or maybe even joy when they are punished. I just don't want us to lie about what it is that's happening. And that is that people were saying things like, this is accountability, not justice. And I guess that's supposed to mean that we've progressed, because in the past people would have said this is justice. And so we're supposed to be happy that now they're using a different word to actually you mean the same thing. No, why wasn't everybody just saying this is punishment, not justice? I did not feel any sort of relief or joy. And I'll tell you why. And it's because 3 people are going to die at police hands today. Yeah. That hasn't changed. And during the time when Chauvin was on trial, dozens of people were killed all over the country by cops. And that isn't going to change because Chauvin is locked up. And I know that that doesn't feel exciting to people and doesn't make them feel happy to hear that. And I'm probably not going to get invited to any parties, and it's okay. But I'm telling the truth.
I'm a faith leader, but I think we also recycle, Mariame, old tropes, right? We just recycle old tropes of, vengeance, of retribution. I mean, we do, sadly. Yeah. And so I'm curious about what you would want to say to people who are watching, who are raising children. How do we reimagine?
So I would say to parents that teaching your children that when they do wrong things, that you're going to punish them, will encourage them to lie to you and to pretend that they didn't do the harmful thing and to evade responsibility. And you are raising a bunch of kids then who are going to be unable to take accountability for harm. So I would say to people, always ask questions of your kids. What happened? If you tell me what really happened, we'll work through an answer and we'll figure out how to make it better together. And I want you to make sure that you don't do this again. And if you do it again, because you're a human being and you make mistakes, we're going to go through this whole entire process again. We created a toolkit. My friend Jenny Beeks created this. She's an excellent restorative justice practitioner in Chicago. She created a toolkit called Restorative Justice at Home. We need different ways to talk with each other. We need new models. We need new language. We need new ways of thinking. And we are doing that. We're offering those tools.
We tend to end this show, or I tend to end the show by asking people, I'm trying to get from the idea that change is possible or another world is possible to the idea that at certain moments in our lives, another world is actually palpable. That we can feel it. We have felt it, maybe just in snatches, just maybe for a moment, maybe in a dream, but ideally not. Is there a moment like that for you that led you to believe, oh, yes, we can do this?
My All the Things church was a white Dutch church, Mariame. It was the first church in New York. And I'm going to go back in time to say the first time I felt the kingdom of God breaking in, Trayvon Martin was killed. It was a Thursday or Friday. And we were all just trying to think what to do. And we just started making phone calls. And we were like, we are going to be in solidarity with Trayvon through this time. There was a sense, Mariame, that our congregation changed from multi-ethnic, multiracial to really anti-racist, really working for reparations. And on my watch, oh my God, it just makes me teary.
Oh.
The people who come together around this issue of revolutionary love and anti-racism blows my heart wide open.
For me, I'm constantly reminded that world that's the not yet is also the current moment in particular times and fragments and experiments. And I think for me, that last year and change of this global pandemic that we've been part of has revealed so much of what's beautiful and incredible about human beings, and also all the things that are flaws and that we need to work on. And one of the things that I remembered very clearly was early on when we were trying to figure out what to do in our apartment building around kind of the COVID response, just how our neighbors really just came together and was like, you know, who are the older people in the area, in the building, who are going to need support, who can do runs to the grocery store, who's healthy, who's like, just people figuring stuff out in the moment when they knew there was a need for it to happen, and not letting other people just die. And that to me it's just so indicative of what's possible with us, but also what we do, what we do all the time, every single day. We save each other. And I choose to focus on that.
Well, the book is fantastic. People should check it out. We do this till we free us. Jacqui Lewis, Mariame Kaba, thanks for joining me. Jacqui will be back in the weeks ahead, so stay tuned for that. I'll be back in just a second with a few closing thoughts. Just because it's difficult to change policing doesn't mean that it's impossible. Just look at Newark, New Jersey. We were there just over a year ago for this program, reporting on the Newark Community Street Team, an experiment in de-escalating violence in the streets and building relationships between the police and the people they policed. Well, today, Anthony Ambrose, Director of Public Safety, whom we interviewed for that episode, says that 2020 was the hardest year in his 34-year career on the force. Why? Because of a pandemic. COVID-19 killed 6 of his officers. There was an uprising against police violence and a reckoning with white supremacy on the force. At one point in the summer of 2020, 1,700 protesters attempted to take over a precinct building. But you know what? While over 1,000 police fired their guns across the United States last year, and roughly 3 people were killed each day, none of that happened in Newark, New Jersey. The police fired not one shot. Not one time, for any reason. And Ambrose credits the de-escalation program. Are things in Newark perfect? Absolutely not. But there's a process in place that's making a difference. And it could be a model. So check out our show, spread the word, and congratulations, the Newark Police Department and the Community Street Team. For more information on my guest, Mariame Kaba, and her book, We Do This Till We Free Us, just out from Haymarket Press, as well as my colleague, Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis of Middle Church, go to patreon.com/The LF Show. That's patreon.com/The LF Show, where you'll find much more information about them and a whole lot of other suggested readings and related episodes to enable you to dig a little deeper into the topic. We also invite you to watch the premiere of every week's episode on our YouTube channel, 11:30 a.m. Sundays. You can participate in a live chat afterwards with invited guests and myself. All the details are at patreon.com/The LF Show. And while you're there, become one of our Patreon partners by becoming a member. Your member support, just a few dollars a month, is what keeps this show available for free to television and radio audiences across the country. So how about it? $3, $5 a month? It's like tossing 75 cents in a tip jar for each individual episode. But collectively, it all adds up, makes the show possible. So big thanks to all of you who are already our precious Patreon partners. And you say that many times to a microphone without popping your peas. Thank you. We appreciate you. This show's produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, with Matt Colacello, Jeremiah Cothran, Mercedes Grostiaga, Jeannie Hopper, Nat Needham, Charlotte Carpenter, David Newman, Rory O'Connor, Ryan Hodes, Sabrina Artel, and Jeanette Hernandez. Major funding for this program is provided by the Novo, Park, Ellen Poss Family, Hisuku Wilson Foundations, the Schumann Media Center, Rising Fund at Tides, Kim Connor and Nick Groombridge, Jane Fonda, and listeners like you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for your ideas. Stay kind. Stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.